Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. For the video today, I wanted to sit down and talk all about what I've been reading so far this year and share how I've gone from reading one book a month last year to one book a week every single week this year so far, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Granted, we are like a third of the way into the year, which is kind of crazy, but I am pretty happy with my setup, so I thought I would share that with you as well. Just a change that I've made so that I'm able to read more. It's also definitely something I've been dwelling on, just the fact that I haven't made many videos this year, and I think part of that is because I've spent a lot of my free time reading, so I figured why not talk all about that. Now, getting back to something I just said, and that was the fact that I probably read about one book a month for last year and a bit less in years previous. I've slowly become more of a reader. I think just like I would have been at the pace in high school or primary school probably, because I think it's a little bit easier to read, you know, books are a bit shorter, you're in the habit of reading in school, and then like a lot of people, certainly myself, I fell out of reading for a bit. I pick a book here or there, but I wasn't in the habit of doing it regularly, and I think something that changed in the course of last year was the fact that I got a Kindle. That is the big secret in how I'm able to read more. Nothing too crazy, obviously. It just makes it a lot easier to read. Prior to having my Kindle, I did have a couple physical books. I wasn't in the habit of buying too many since I don't want to take up too much space or spend money on paperback books myself. I'm a little bit more of a minimalist in that sense, so the Kindle does make a lot of sense to someone like me. I also happen to read a couple books on my phone, even though my phone is a bit of a small screen size, and the rest were probably audiobooks, since I do love a good audiobook every now and then. However, last year during the middle of the year Amazon Prime sale or Prime Day, I did manage to pick up this Kindle. So I think this is one of the more basic ones or one of the older ones. I had to look up what this one was because I know there's so many different ones that are out there, and this is the 10th generation, or the one that came out in 2019. I figured since I haven't used an e-reader in quite a while, because I did have one about 10 years ago. It was a non-brand one. I can't remember what it was, but I used it a bit, and when I tried reading more, that old one that I had wouldn't actually take any more books. It was so outdated, so I got the Kindle, especially for a good price. I can't remember how much I paid, but considering it was in the Prime Day sale, I think it was less than $100. I want to say maybe $70 or something. I feel that's pretty cheap for what it is. Of course, they have like a wide variety. Some are quite a bit more expensive. I think some of the newer ones are waterproof or have different colored screens, like you might be able to do different shades of paper, but this standard one I think is perfect for a beginner. It certainly has helped me a lot, and I don't even know if I would want any of those extra special features myself. This works just fine. I think the main reason why I'm able to read more with a Kindle is the fact that I can just change pages by tapping. I do feel like I'm a pretty quick reader to begin with, and this just enables me to read nice and quickly as opposed to having a paper book, which I've done plenty of times before. The time frame of turning a page isn't that much time, but I think it's just the comfort in holding it in one hand. Even I can read lying down without opening the pages. I know this might sound strange, honestly, but it's just easier for me. I know some people read slower in a Kindle, but that's not been my experience. Certainly having a physical book is a lot nicer to look at. I've just got mine in a plain grey case. With this older style version, there are a lot less options on cases, but I did want to have one just to keep it safe. But I know that there are some really pretty cases for some of the newer Kindles, if that's your thing. One day if I upgrade this, I would maybe get a fun cover, I'm not sure. Obviously having a physical copy is nice because they look good, you can have really pretty covers and build a nice collection, but again, I'm a bit more of a minimalist in that sense, or I've certainly tried to be in the past couple years. I think some other benefits of the Kindle though that definitely outweigh a physical copy is the fact that you can instantly access any book, and there are a lot of ways to do this, whether you buy them. I've tried to buy single books whenever I can get them, like less than $10. There are some pretty good sales when you can get them online on Kindle, like through Amazon, but there's also Prime Reading, which I already have access to Amazon Prime, so that is heaps of books, and I've read quite a few of them that are completely free since I have Prime already. And I know a lot of people use Kindle Unlimited as well, which is that subscription service you can pay for I believe unlimited reading for about $10 a month. That's not something I've done yet because I actually have quite a few books to be read, and maybe down the track I would look at Kindle Unlimited. For me, it's just not something I'm doing yet, but obviously that's another option. And again, it is pretty much instant access, not like buying a book and waiting for it to come online. If you buy it that way, going to a bookstore or a library, there's no waiting around, so it is nice for that instant gratification. Another benefit is, of course, the size of it. It is very small in terms of being able to fit into a bag. This is maybe the size of a small paperback, but it is very light, and you can have so many books in there. So that's what I love. I keep this in my handbag at all times because anytime I've got a bit of spare time, like out and about on my lunch break, I just pick this up. And obviously I use it at home as well, but I think having those little chunks in the day where you can read more is a lot more helpful by having a Kindle versus carrying around a heavy book, or at least that's what I think. Obviously, it's also pretty handy to read at night because it has that built-in light. Of course, even though the Kindle is an electronic item and you do have to charge it, it does have a long battery life. The one that I have is said to last 4 weeks without charging. Because I have my brightness quite low, I think mine lasts a lot longer. I think I've only charged this a handful of times since I've gotten it. And again, I've been reading quite a lot, so I am really wrapped with this. I love it, I recommend it. Of course, there's no denying it is special to have a physical copy of a book and touch the paper, smell the book. That's an experience that can't be replicated through a Kindle, but I think I would probably buy physical copies of a book if it was my favorite. I certainly own a couple physical ones that I will never get rid of that I love, but I do really think that the pros outweigh the cons if you want a large amount of reading or easy access to reading, and if you don't care to build a physical collection. For me, that's not an issue, so the Kindle just wins overall, and it's definitely been my top secret weapon to read more. Truth be told, I really do believe that everyone is a physical book reader and that's their preference until they get a Kindle, and then it's a no-brainer, but that's just my hot take. Anyway, now I think I've shared my love enough for the Kindle that I have, so I think now what I'll do is quickly go through, or as quick as I can, go through the books that I've read, share my thoughts on them and what they're about. In case you are looking for any recommendations, here's what I've read this year so far. Now, the very first book that I read this year is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. For years, rumours of the Marsh Girl haunted Barclay Cove, a quiet fishing village. Kaya Clark is barefoot and wild, unfit for polite society, so in late 1969, when the popular Chase Andrews is found dead, locals immediately suspect her. Now, this is a book that I read on my summer break just between Christmas and New Year's from work, and it was really nice to read outside on my back deck with the trees blowing. I felt like I was in the marsh, and this is actually a book that I feel like I've heard a lot of people describe as a modern classic, or it will be one day considered a classic. Even though that sounds kind of wanky, I do tend to agree. This is an amazing read. I really loved getting wrapped up in the story, and I thought that the descriptions of everything really put me there. It was admittedly a little bit tricky to get into because it does have regional and somewhat older language used. It's still English, but it is of course set in the South in the US. It's a little bit different. They use certain terminology and words that I just didn't really understand at first until I got into the swing of it, but it is a little bit like poetry as well. It is a beautiful read, despite some of the subject matter about the fact that someone has been killed, and it is a bit of a murder mystery, or more of a courtroom drama. It does flip between back and forward in the story of this young woman's life living out in the marsh and kind of piecing together up until the very end what happened to this person, if she killed him or if she didn't. Overall, I really loved this book, and like I said, it was a little bit tricky to get into at the start. I was obsessed and I kept reading through, pushing as I got to the end because I wanted to know what happened, and it did actually make me cry at the end. So Beautiful book, I would recommend it. I gave this one 4.5 stars. Now the next book that I read this year is the only hard copy that I have in the whole year so far. It is Amnesia by Sinclair Smith, and I'll explain a little bit why I had to have this one, why this one is on my list. But first, the plot. Alicia wakes up in hospital to find she's in the middle of a nightmare. Alicia has amnesia. She doesn't even recognize her own face in the mirror. How did she land in hospital, and why won't the doctors tell her anything? Then Alicia's sister Marta arrives to take her home. Surely Marta will help her get her memory back, but nothing feels right. Could Marta be hiding something from Alicia? Does Alicia's amnesia conceal a terrifying secret Alicia is afraid to remember, but she could be dead if she doesn't? So this is a young adult. It's a point horror book, so look, it even says Scholastic on there. It is a young adult book, I think even almost a children's book. It was my favorite book in primary school, okay? This is a very short read. I think it's less than 200 pages, but I had to have this. Like I said, it was my favorite book in primary school, and to be honest, I knew I loved this book, and for the longest time I couldn't remember what it was or where to get it. I was speaking to my sister at the start of the year and saying I remember certain plot points about this book. This girl has amnesia, her sister is very creepy, and I remembered certain other plot points that were so random. I googled it, I kept trying to find it online, and I could never. But after speaking to my sister, I really thought on it, and who would have thought the book about a girl with amnesia is just called Amnesia. When I found it online, I had to get it. This was an eBay buy, and I don't regret it. I think the cover is pretty cool as well. I do tend to like the look of a lot of young adult, like Goosebumps or point horror like this one type covers. They just look very cool, and this is something I think I'll keep. I had thought about selling it, but it's a bit of a comfort read, very quick, very silly. I enjoyed it a lot, and I gave that one 4 stars. The next book I read is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. I know a lot of people will be familiar with this story from either possibly the book or the movie adaptation, but if you're not, 7-year-old Gwen and her parents Eric and Andrew are vacationing at a remote cabin on a quiet New Hampshire lake. Their closest neighbours are more than 2 miles in either direction along a rutted dirt road. One afternoon, as Gwen catches grasshoppers in the front yard, a stranger unexpectedly appears in her driveway. Leonard is the largest man Gwen has ever seen, and he is young, friendly, and wins her over almost instantly. Leonard and Gwen talk and play until Leonard abruptly apologizes and tells Gwen, "None of what is going to happen is your fault." 3 more strangers then arrive at the cabin, carrying unidentifiable, menacing objects. As Gwen sprints inside to warn her parents, Leonard calls out, "Your dads won't let us in, Gwen, but they have to. We need your help to save the world." So this book is one that I felt like I had to read before the movie adaptation came out. I'm a fan of M. Night Shyamalan movies, I think just as much as the next person, but I also like Paul Tremblay for the book A Head Full of Ghosts, which I did read last year, and I really liked that. So I was really intrigued on this one. Now, I actually read this book under pretty ideal circumstances because I read it at the time I was away on holiday with my husband and some friends. We were staying at a cabin in kind of Sunshine Coast area, but it was just nice to sit out on the back deck with trees around and sort of feel a little bit like I was at that cabin, but without dangerous people there. And because it was a relaxing weekend away, I actually managed to read this book in one day. I just sat out, read it. It was also pretty quick to read because of the chapters. They were kind of long chapters, but it swapped between different point of views, and something about it, I guess obviously the plot and just wanting to know what would happen next, kept me gripped, so I did read it in one sitting. I enjoyed this one a lot and gave it 4.5 stars. My next read mixed things up a little bit because it's actually a short story, the only short story I have in my list so far, and it is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Diagnosed by her physician husband with a temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, after the birth of her child, a woman is urged to rest for the summer in an old colonial mansion. Forbidden from doing work of any kind, she spends her days in the house's former nursery with its barred windows, scratched floor, and peeling yellow wallpaper. So I absolutely loved this, even though it is quite horrifying. It is possibly one of the scariest things I've ever read, especially considering how short it is. It just packs a punch. Part of the reason why it is so terrifying is because of this woman's descent into madness, but because it is also based on someone of the author's real life story. She went through something quite similar, and I believe a lot of other women did at the time. This rest cure was very common back in the day. I don't know if I said yet, this book is 131 years old, but I think it's a timeless feminist read. I really loved it. It's quick, it packs a punch, and it is so terrifying. I loved this one and I give it 5 stars. After that one, I moved on to the next. It is Have You Seen Me by Kate White. On a cold rainy morning, finance journalist Allie Linden arrives early to work in her Manhattan office, only to find that she's forgotten her keycard and needs to have a colleague she's never met let her in. When her boss finally arrives, he seems surprised to see her because she hasn't worked there in 5 years. Desperate to unearth answers, Allie focuses on figuring out where she has spent her last missing 48 hours. As ominous details of the 2 days pile up, so does the terrifying pressure. She must recover the time she lost before the time she has left runs out. I was keen to pick this book up because clearly I love an Amnesia sort of plot, and because I have read some books by Kate White before that I enjoyed. I have read The Secrets You Keep and The Second Husband, and I enjoyed those enough. They are domestic thrillers, which is my favorite sort of genre. You're going to see a few more on the list coming up. This book was silly and fun, had a lot of wild twists. Certainly I don't think anyone could have predicted the ending. It was maybe even too wild and crazy, which took me out a little bit, but these are the sort of books I like. It was fun, it was good enough as a read, and I enjoyed it. I don't think I'd read it again, but I did give this one 3.5 stars. I like it for what it is. Feeling like another domestic thriller, the next book I had to read was The Perfect Marriage by Geneva Rose. Sarah Morgan is a successful and powerful defense attorney in Washington, D.C. At 33 years old, she is a named partner at her firm, and life is going exactly how she planned. The same cannot be said for her husband Adam. He is a struggling writer who has had little success in his career. He begins to tire of his and Sarah's relationship as she is constantly working. Out in the secluded woods, at Adam and Sarah's second home, Adam engages in a passionate affair with Kelly Summers. Then one morning, everything changes. Adam is arrested for Kelly's murder. She has been found stabbed to death in Adam and Sarah's second home. Sarah soon finds herself playing the defender for her own husband, a man accused of murdering his mistress. So this is a book I was pretty excited to read for the title and the cover alone. I sometimes gravitate to books for this reason, and I had also heard good things. I feel like I read this one pretty quickly. Although the ending was a bit predictable in my opinion, I still enjoyed it nonetheless. Overall, it was a fun domestic thriller, and I gave this one 4 stars. Now the next 2 books that I read coming up were ones that I read when I was away in Hamilton Island, so they certainly have a bit of a theme. The first of which is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Nora Stevens' life is books. She's read them all, and she is not that type of heroine. Not the plucky one, not the laid-back dream girl, and especially not the sweetheart. In fact, the only people Nora is a heroine for are her clients, for whom she lands enormous deals as a cutthroat literary agent, and her beloved little sister Libby, which is why she agrees to go to Sunshine Falls, North Carolina for the month of August, when Libby begs her for a sister's trip away, with visions of a small town transformation for Nora, who she's convinced needs to become the heroine in her own story. But instead of picnics in meadows, or run-ins with a handsome country doctor, or bulging four-armed bartender, Nora keeps bumping into Charles Lastra, a bookish brooding editor from back in the city. It would be a meet cute if not for the fact that they've met many times and it's never been cute. Also, I'm realizing perhaps I should have summarized these descriptions a little bit because that was a lot. This is A Summer Enemies to Lovers by Emily Henry with a cute cartoon cover. Pretty much her niche. So I did read this on holiday in Hamilton Island, and I think it was an ideal pick for then. Certainly it's not normally the sort of book I would gravitate towards, since I'm not such a fan of romance books. It has obviously gotten a lot of good word of mouth on TikTok, so it's very popular and I did want to check it out. Plus the cover seemed fun, and it just seemed like the ideal sort of read on holiday. Overall, it was easy to read and lighthearted. I gave this one 3.5 stars. The next book is super similar, so I apologize, this is going to sound pretty repetitive. It is Beach Read by Emily Henry. Augustus Everett is an acclaimed author of literary fiction. January Andrews writes best-selling romance. when she pens a happily ever after, he kills off his entire cast. They're polar opposites. In fact, the only thing they have in common is that for the next 3 months, they're living in neighbouring beach houses, broke and bogged down with writer's block. Until one hazy evening, one thing leads to another and they strike a deal designed to force them out of their creative ruts. Augustus will spend the summer writing something happy, and January will pen the next great American novel. Everyone will finish a book and no one will fall in love. Really. So like I've said, this was another Hamilton Island read, another summer enemies to lovers romance type novel by Emily Henry. I think maybe I would have liked this one more if I didn't piggyback right off the other book because they are so similar. Like I said, a lot is very much the same. It was still really fun to read and lighthearted, very casual reading by the pool with a cocktail in hand, or relaxing where we were staying on the island, but I do think I would have liked it more if I spaced them out because they were so similar. With that being said, I do think I liked Book Lovers a little bit more than this one. Both were still enjoyable enough. If you like romance, I think you'd probably like it a little bit more than I did. I give this one 3 stars. Now pivoting back to my favourite genre, the domestic thriller, I read Local Woman Missing by Mary Kubica. Shelby Thibault is the first to go missing. Not long after, Meredith Dickey and her 6-year-old daughter, Delia, vanished just blocks away from where Shelby was last seen, striking fear into their once peaceful community. Are these incidents connected? After an elusive search that yields more questions than answers, the case eventually goes cold. Now, 11 years later, Delia shockingly returns. Everyone wants to know what happened to her, but no one is prepared for what they'll find. Now, this book was super gripping. I had heard a lot about it, and I think this was another one on Prime Reading. I read quite a few on Prime Reading. I can't remember all of them, but I'm pretty sure this was on there. It started out very heavily with, I think it was the 2nd chapter. The first chapter was interesting and a bit of a hook, but after that 2nd chapter, if you've read it, I'm sure you know what I mean, when it got really dark, I was hooked. I actually read this in one night, one sitting. Almost all the way through reading this, I felt like I was watching a thriller movie. It just felt like a thriller movie put to page. Obviously it's a thriller book, but it really felt cinematic, if that makes sense. Clearly I'm saying a lot of great things about this one, however, I didn't like the ending. To me personally, I know some people loved it all the way through, loved the ending. For me, it wasn't as good as the rest of the book, but I might be the outlier here. Definitely check it out and judge for yourself. Overall, I still really loved it and I would recommend this book. To be clear, I don't think the ending was predictable. I just wasn't a fan myself. But really, the rest of the book was truly amazing. I gave this one 4.5 stars. The next book I read was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. 20 years ago, Claire Scott's eldest sister Julia went missing. No one knew where she went. No note, no body. It was a mystery that was never solved and tore her family apart. Now another girl has disappeared with chilling echoes of the past, and it seems that she might not be the only one. Claire is convinced Julia's disappearance is linked, but when she begins to learn the truth about her sister, she is confronted with a shocking discovery, and nothing will ever be the same. Now, for the longest time, I have heard great things about Karen Slaughter books, especially this one, so I was very excited to check it out, and super thrilled as I read it how much I loved it. It also got me hooked pretty straight on. I think I read it over the course of a weekend, so not as quick as the previous, but I really loved this one. If the previous book I mentioned was like a thriller movie to page, this one was almost like a horror movie that I was reading. It had a lot of twists, I loved the journey, and I liked the ending on this one. Overall, I did really enjoy it and I would recommend it, even though it has a lot of dark subject matter. So I think definitely check for trigger warnings on this one if you want to pick it up, but I would heavily recommend it. I enjoyed it so much and I definitely think I need to pick up and try more Karen Slaughter books. I give this one 5 stars. While I loved that book a lot, it was very dark and heavy, so I decided for something a little bit more light. The next one is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. For a while, Daisy Jones and the Six were everywhere. Their albums were on every turntable, they sold out arenas from coast to coast, their sound defined an era, and then on the 12th of July 1979 they split. Nobody ever knew why until now. They were lovers and friends and brothers and rivals. They couldn't believe their luck until it ran out. This is their story of the early days and the wild nights, but everyone remembers the truth differently. Okay, so this one I listened to on Audible. As I'm reading a book a week for the year, I don't mind using Audible here or there. I do have the subscription, I love audiobooks, and I've heard that this audiobook was amazing. I can't imagine reading it for the format that it's in. I would heavily recommend the audiobook as well, because it's interviews, or yeah, it's like interviews about the band, from the band, I think 40 years on. I know they changed the timeline in the show, but I'm not going to talk about the show. I think that the audiobook was amazing because it had so many characters, and a lot of the times they were talking for short periods. Each character in the book had their own specific voice actor for it. Quick tangent, I am definitely not a fan of audiobooks where the narrator does voices for other characters, like a woman trying to voice a man or vice versa, or even women voicing other women, where they change their tone. For some reason that really annoys me. I don't know, that might just be me, but I love the fact that there were different voice actors. It was really easy to keep track, and it was unlike anything I've ever heard before as an audiobook. I really loved this one, but the story itself, even ignoring the audiobook part, the story itself was just truly amazing. This book was personally really interesting to me because I am a big fan of Fleetwood Mac. I love their music, I've seen them live. This is another book that I had to read or listen to before an adaptation came out, because I knew the show was coming up on Amazon Prime shortly after I listened to the audiobook. Now when I went into this one, I expected drama. I didn't expect twists or reveals, but there was actually some in the book as well, which was quite interesting, and I loved it. Really quickly, I know I said I wouldn't talk about the show, but I loved the show just as much as the book. Even though some things were different, I loved both. I'd recommend both, and I give this book 5 stars. Coming off the back of that one, I decided to also try something a little bit different, and this was around the time that I started using NetGalley to access advanced releases, and I was so lucky to be approved for one in particular. It is A Perfect Vintage by Chelsea Fagan. Old Money, Younger Men, One Intoxicating Summer. Leah Mortimer has everything under control. As a highly sought-after consultant specializing in transforming dilapidated French country estates into boutique hotels, she relishes her freedom as a single, child-free woman, and her life is full, occupied as much by her impeccable historic renovations as by the aristocratic and often exhausting French families she works for. And when Leah unexpectedly falls for the much younger son of her boss, she quickly learns the beauty and danger of losing control. As affairs bloom in the idyllic chateau, wars of inheritance play out between the family, and betrayals threaten even the most solid relationships. Leah realizes that it's not just a broken heart she's risking, but her entire meticulously constructed life blowing up in her face. So I know I did mention I was lucky enough to receive this one as an ARC from NetGalley. I was so excited when I first heard about this book because I'm a fan of Chelsea Fagan's channel. I love The Financial Diet, and as a person she just seems really interesting to me. I love her presence online, and I was super keen for this book. I actually thought I would buy it, and I still might, despite the fact I've read it. I think this is one I'd probably like to buy in hard copy because the cover is so beautiful and it was really such a fun read. Again, I've said before, I'm not typically a fan of romance novels, but I think the reason why I liked this one a lot more than the others is because it had a lot more going on. It was women's fiction, and it was about a passionate sort of character that wasn't just someone who wanted to fall in love, if that makes sense. She seemed like a real fleshed out person, but it still had little bits of romance and even spice peppered throughout. I really loved Chelsea's writing style and felt like I was immersed in the story, as if I was whisked away to France. It was a lovely book to read, really fun, and definitely one I would recommend. It is not out yet, but it comes out soon. I heavily recommend picking it up. Clearly I've sung its praises. I have to say this one was definitely a 5-star read for me. The sun is setting and I'm starting to look like Casper the Friendly Ghost in front of these lights, but I'm nearly done with going through these. Yes, in fact I have 2 more to go through. So the next book I read was The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. Welcome to the family, Nina Winchester says as I shake her elegant manicured hand. I smile politely, gazing around the marble hallway. Working here is my last chance to start fresh. I can pretend to be whoever I like, but I'll soon learn that the Winchester secrets are far more dangerous than my own. Every day I clean the Winchesters' beautiful house top to bottom. I collect their daughter from school, and I cook a delicious meal for the whole family before heading up to eat alone in my tiny room on the top floor. I try to ignore how Nina makes a mess and watches me clean up, how she tells strange lies about her own daughter, and how her husband Andrew seems more broken every day. But as I look into Andrew's handsome brown eyes, so full of pain, it's hard not to imagine what it would be like to live Nina's life. And by the time I realize my attic bedroom door only locks from the outside, it's too late. Now, I had heard a lot about this book and kept seeing Frida McFadden's titles pop up on Kindle. I'm pretty sure all of her works are, again, I'm pretty sure that this one is on Prime Reading as well, but I kept seeing her books pop up and they are very similar looking by the covers. Just like Emily Henry's, they're all colourful, sort of cute cartoon. Frida McFadden's books look like this. I've got them on the screen. I believe the authors don't pick the covers, right? I think that normally it is the publisher, maybe. Somebody else picks them, or at least that's what I've heard. And hers definitely have a distinctive look, which I'll be honest, I'm not a fan. Anyway, from everything I've heard, I had heard that The Housemaid was her most popular book. It was a domestic thriller, it looked interesting, so I decided to pick it up. And I actually really enjoyed the book. I thought it was very interesting. It had twists I definitely didn't predict. At a certain point I became suspicious, but it wasn't something super obvious in my opinion, although I've heard some people say they guessed what was going to happen. This might be if they had read The Last Mrs. Parrish, which I haven't read, but I have heard some less than positive things about how suspicious these plots are similar. The Last Mrs. Parrish coming out first, and then Frida McFadden's book The Housemaid coming out. Apparently they're very similar. Again, I haven't read the other one, so I can't really comment on that, but for the amount that I've heard this, it does make me feel not so great about reading this one. Like I had to drop my excitement for a little bit because it seems a bit unfair if she did copy off another author. Maybe it's all innocent, but I think this definitely tarred my opinion a lot. I feel like I can't read The Last Mrs. Parrish now. It was on my to be read, and maybe I still will. Maybe I'll give it a bit of time and try it, but all this to say, I gave this one 2 stars. And finally at the last title, I don't know how clear it is to see. It is pretty dark. I've just got my mirror lights on. It's basically nighttime now. So it's good right at the end. The most recent book I read is The Birthday Reunion by Claire Sieber. 4 friends, 1 dream getaway, but who will make it out alive? When the gold-rimmed invitations arrive through the doors of best friends Simone, Hannah and Bekki, they are instantly taken aback. Their ex-best friend Jodie is inviting them to a lavish Mediterranean villa to celebrate her birthday. They haven't spoken in years since she betrayed them in the worst way. So how did they make the guest list? Because Jodie didn't invite them here. But by the end of the weekend, it will become clear who did. Someone else has a reason for revenge. Who will make it out alive? Again, this is another book I got on NetGalley, so I feel very lucky to have picked this up. I had not heard anything about this book. Again, this isn't released yet. I haven't read anything by the author or heard of her myself, but I've seen she's got quite a few titles out. What did draw me to this is the cover and the title. It seemed quite interesting to me, and the premise sounded interesting as well. So I had to pick it up. With this one, I loved the premise. It also was quite quick and easy to read because it had very short chapters. There were maybe 2 or 3 pages at a time, so it was just very much going through. I read another chapter, one more, and I really finished this quite quickly. Again, I think I read it in 2 days. It was a fun read with unpredictable twists, which I thought was quite nice, but the only thing I did struggle with on this one is the fact that there were quite a lot of characters. Obviously 5 main characters, I guess, and changing between their point of views so often between those chapters was a bit of a struggle because they didn't always establish who was speaking from their point of view with the chapter, if that makes sense. The book jumped from present to past, which is very common in certainly a lot of the books I've read, or possibly books these days. I think it's very common to change from then and now, but I think for the sheer fact that there were so many characters, some of them went by different names or nicknames as well, that just made it a little bit tricky. But the plot itself was amazing. I think overall I really liked it, and again it had a bit of a cinematic feel to it. I feel like I could see this again as something that could be adapted to a movie, and I think it might be a little bit more easy to understand, to be honest. But I liked this one. I would recommend it when it comes out, and if you do, I just think pay close attention when you're reading. It's not something you can passively read, I don't think, like an Emily Henry or Colleen Hoover, just because of the characters changing and the trickiness of the names. Plus, I don't think the author, gave us much information in the characters. Like, there's backstory, but I couldn't imagine what any of these characters looked like or who they were as people. They did blend a little bit together. Overall, I did really like it. In fact, I did give this one 4.5 stars. Now that's it with all of the books I've read so far for the year. I've been talking for quite a while. I can see my camera battery flashing, and so yes, my battery did die there. I was cut off. I think I was just saying, if you have any suggestions, let me know what your suggestions are, because I am trying to read, or I will continue reading a book a week for the year. I've got a lot of suggestions on my TBR, but if you've got any recommendations that you think I'll like based on what I've said today, I'd love to hear them. But like I said, I will be leaving you here, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye!